9:17 a.m., the mountain exhaled. 1 second, the slope was silent. The next second, it moved. A white wall broke loose from the peak and dropped like a collapsing sky. Snow didn't fall. It launched. It surged forward with violent speed, racing downhill, faster than any human could run, faster than any warning could spread, faster than fear could form into thought. In seconds, the entire face of the mountain transformed from the solid ground into a living avalanche. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Ice shattered. Air vanished inside the blast of powder. The slope that had stood frozen for centuries suddenly behaved like liquid. People below never had time to understand what they were seeing. A skier looked up. A guide turned his head. Someone opened their mouth to shout. The sound swallowed them first. Not thunder, or not wind. Something deeper. A tearing roar that felt like the earth itself was ripping open. The fracture line stretched across the ridge in a single violent motion. A crack raced through the snowpack faster than sound, slicing the mountain's surface like glass, breaking in slow motion. Then gravity took control, and the entire slab released at once. Thousands of tons of compacted snow dropped. The force was brutal, relentless, absolute. Within 4 seconds, the slope was gone. What had been smooth white terrain seconds earlier was now a violent river of ice, rock, and frozen debris surging downhill with unstoppable momentum. The avalanche gathered mass as it moved, pulling in everything in its path, growing heavier, faster, deadlier. The temperature inside it plunged. The air thickened. Breathing became impossible. Visibility vanished into pure white chaos. Inside the slide, there was no sky, no ground, no direction. Only pressure. Only motion. Only the crushing weight of a mountain collapsing in real time. Survival in conditions like that is measured in seconds, not minutes. When the avalanche finally stopped, silence slammed down. Just as suddenly as the noise had erupted, the valley froze again. Wind drifted across the wreckage. Powder settled like ash after an explosion, where there had once been a pristine alpine slope. There was now a scar, a massive gouge carved into the mountainside, jagged, raw, violent, like something had clawed the earth open from the inside. Emergency calls began within minutes. Signals cut in and out. Voices shook. Coordinates repeated. Words collided with static. Rescue teams launched immediately. Helicopters lifted. Engines roared. Rotors sliced the thin alpine air as crews raced toward the site. They expected casualties. They expected buried victims. They expected wreckage. What they did not expect was that this avalanche had exposed something buried deep beneath the mountain's surface. Something no storm should have touched. Something no slide should have reached. Something that had been hidden under layers of snow and ice for longer than anyone alive could remember. Because this wasn't just a collapse. It was an unveiling. And what waded under that snow was not rock, not debris, not anything natural. It was something that should never have been uncovered. The Alps look eternal, unshakable, ancient, but mountains move. On that morning, the shift began long before anyone noticed. Deep within the snowpack, pressure had been building for weeks. Storm after storm had buried the slope under fresh layers, each one heavier than the last. Beneath that weight sat a fragile foundation, thin crystals of old snow that had hardened into a weak, unstable sheet. It looked solid. It wasn't. 3 weeks of snowfall stacked pressure onto that hidden fault line. Then came a warm front that softened the upper layers just enough to loosen their grip. Hours later, night temperatures plunged, freezing everything back into place. Heavy slab on top. Fragile layer beneath. Perfect conditions for collapse. At 9:16 a.m., the mountain reached its limit. A crack shot across the slope. It was thin, sharp, violent. It spread outward in a straight line, slicing through the snowpack faster than the human ear could register. No one heard it. Not the skiers carving turns below, not the climbers edging across the ridge, not the guide leading 6 tourists through what looked like untouched powder. The fracture widened instantly. The entire slab separated from the mountain. Then gravity pulled. The surface dropped. What had been stable ground seconds earlier became a moving mass. The slab shattered into blocks as it accelerated, breaking apart while gaining speed, turning into a roaring cascade of snow and ice. Within 4 seconds, the full mountainside released, thousands of tons collapsing into motion. It didn't slide. It charged. The avalanche surged downhill at highway speed, devouring the slope beneath it. Snow slammed into rock and exploded into clouds of white powder. Ice chunks collided and shattered. Trees disappeared into the flow without resistance. The moving mass thickened, growing denser and heavier with every meter it travelled. Snow is soft when it rests. When it moves like this, it becomes solid force. The impact power matched a freight train. Witnesses later struggled to describe the sound. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was something harsher, deeper, layered with grinding pressure and violent motion. The noise filled the valley and vibrated through bone. People felt it before they fully saw it. A skier turned and froze. A climber slipped mid-step. Someone tried to shout a warning. The avalanche swallowed the sound. White surged forward, expanding wider as it descended. A rolling wall of frozen debris that erased everything in its path. Air compressed ahead of it, blasting outward in a shockwave strong enough to knock a person off their feet before the snow even arrived. Then the main force hit. Inside the avalanche there was no horizon, no sky, no ground. Victims were thrown, flipped, and dragged through dense snow, moving with crushing momentum. Direction lost meaning. Up and down became indistinguishable. Breathing became impossible as powder filled mouths and noses instantly. The slide twisted bodies like leaves in a storm. Pressure built from all sides, snow packed tight around limbs and torsos. Movement slowed, then stopped. When the avalanche finally lost speed, the mass settled like wet cement. The surface hardened within seconds, locking everything inside. Anyone trapped beneath it was sealed in place, entombed in frozen weight, heavier than stone. Survival after burial depends on one thing: time. Air pockets collapse quickly. Oxygen fades, panic burns what little breath remains. In ideal conditions, a buried victim might last 15 minutes before suffocation takes over. Calls for help went out at 9:19 a.m. Coordinates repeated, voices shaking, words rushed. Rescue units mobilized immediately, but mountains slow everything. Distance stretches, air thins, terrain fights back. By the time teams reached the site, engines roaring and rotors cutting the sky, the clock had already moved forward 22 minutes. In avalanche survival, 22 minutes is not a delay. It's a verdict. Helicopters touched down and the teams moved immediately. Avalanche response runs on discipline. Every motion is trained. Every second matters. Rescuers spread across the debris field in straight lines, scanning, listening, sweeping, receivers back and forth. Transceivers searched for signals buried beneath the snowpack. Probes stabbed downward in rhythmic patterns. Thermal drones hovered overhead, mapping heat traces invisible to the eye. Buried victims never call for help. Snowpacks too tight. Air disappears too fast. Silence is what rescuers listen for. The first signal appeared within minutes. A skier, alive. Weak pulse, shallow breathing. Dug out fast. The second signal came 10 meters away. Another survivor, conscious, hypothermic, still breathing. Hope rose across the slope. 2 found meant more could be alive. Teams widened the grid, scanning faster, moving with sharpened urgency. Then a third signal appeared. It didn't move. Rescuers locked onto the location and dropped to their knees. Shovels cut into the debris with aggressive speed. Snow sprayed behind them as they dug. Seconds mattered now. Every strike had to be precise. Every scoop had to count. Metal struck something solid. They stopped. Not a body. Rock. That didn't make sense. Avalanches bury. They pile snow on top of the surface. They don't usually strip terrain down to bedrock. Not this quickly, not this cleanly. Yet beneath the thin debris layer was exposed stone, smooth and bare, like it had been scraped clean. The slide had cut deeper than expected, much deeper. Rescuers shifted position and cleared more snow. The debris layer was unusually shallow. Instead of the normal meters-thick burial, parts of the slope looked shaved down, as if something had peeled the mountain open. That was when someone noticed it. A dark angle beneath the ice. At first it looked like shadow. Just a shape interrupting the white surface. But shadows don't hold edges. This did. Straight lines, hard corners. Geometry that didn't belong in a natural slope. They brushed away more snow. The shape grew. It wasn't rock. Rock fractures randomly. This surface was flat, clean, deliberate. Someone thought it was equipment, lost gear from climbers. Maybe part of an old installation buried years ago. The team kept clearing, expecting to uncover something small. Instead, they revealed more surface. And more. The object extended farther than an equipment case ever could. Its edges ran straight in both directions, disappearing under packed snow. Even half exposed, it was obvious this thing was large, far larger than anything a climber would carry. Gloves scraped frost aside. Metal showed through, darkened, weathered, pitted with age. Not aluminum, not steel, not anything that looked recently manufactured. The surface had a dull, matte tone, almost black, where oxidation had eaten into it over time. It didn't shine, it absorbed light. More snow came off. A rectangular plane emerged, smooth except for markings carved into it. Lines cut into the metal in deliberate patterns, symbols sharp, precise. Not decorative scratches, not random damage, intentional engravings. No one recognized them. They weren't letters used in the region. Not Italian, not German, not French. The shapes didn't match trail markers or survey codes. They looked older, stranger, purposeful. Wind swept across the exposed metal and whistled along its edges. No one spoke. The team just stared, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what they were uncovering. They cleared another section. The object stretched wider, at least 3 meters long, already visible, and still continuing beneath the snowpack. Its sides ran perfectly straight, angles crisp, proportions exact. Natural formations don't produce symmetry like that. Erosion doesn't carve rectangles. This wasn't debris carried down by the avalanche. It had been here before the slide, buried deep, waiting. A rescuer brushed snow from the lower edge and exposed something attached to the metal's underside. Fabric. Frozen into the ice. Not modern synthetic weave. The fibers were thicker, rougher, hand-woven texture visible even through frost. The cloth had darkened with age, stiff as bark, preserved by decades of cold. The team slowed their movements. This was no longer a rescue dig. This was an excavation. Whatever lay beneath the mountain had been hidden a very long time, and the avalanche hadn't brought it down. It had uncovered it. Authorities sealed the site within an hour. Officially, the closure was blamed on slide risk. Unofficially, it was because of what appeared beneath the exposed metal. As rescuers cleared snow from the lower edge, a shape came into view. A boot, leather, hand-stitched, frozen solid, still attached to a leg. Human! The Avalanche hadn't only uncovered an object. It had revealed a body preserved in ice, features intact, skin pale, clothing undamaged. Cold had locked him in time. Examination showed immediate burial with no oxygen exposure. Estimated age, more than a century. But the real shock was in his hand. His fingers were clamped around a device, a metal cylinder with a glass dial and a needle frozen mid-reading. Precision instrument, early 20th century. Identified hours later as a barometric pressure recorder used in high-altitude scientific surveys. He wasn't climbing, he was measuring. Records confirmed a vanished expedition from 1924. 3 researchers disappeared during a storm. No trace was ever found. Until now. When the slab was finally cleared, its underside revealed engraved text, clean lines, deliberate lettering, do not remove, structural stability, critical. The metal wasn't debris. It had been placed there intentionally, sealing whatever lay beneath. Ground scans of the exposed cavity showed empty space below the surface. Not a crack, not a fissure, a chamber, large, hollow, artificial. The avalanche hadn't just exposed history, it had opened something. The valley was evacuated, access blocked, no public explanation released. One technician spoke before communications shut down. 3 words, not natural. Mountains bury the past under pressure and time, but sometimes pressure breaks, sometimes the seal fails. And when it does, what emerges isn't always meant to be seen. If one peak has already opened, how many more are waiting?